Hello everyone, good evening from Germany. So, another KLANG webinar about today, KLANG integration. So we're going to talk about the integrated workflow of KLANG processors in the DiGiCo SD and quantum range consoles. My plan for today is that I will give you an overview a little bit how KLANG products can be used in general, and then how they can be used in the DiGiCo consoles. You will learn about the mechanics behind all that, so how all the little bits and pieces are working together. Then we will go through all the necessary steps to make the devices talk to each other. And then we will do a full live setup together with the setup that I have with me over here. So to get started, as you might or might not know, we can use a KLANG processor no matter if it's a Fabric or a KLANG 4 or a DMI KLANG with pretty much any mixing console in any environment. For that we would send direct outs or submixes from our mixing board into our processor. Can also be a combination of both, by the way. And then we are sending the immersive mixes from KLANG into a KLANG Quelle headphone amp or into our RF transmitters or whichever output device we are choosing to use. And then we control everything that is happening inside the processor with our KLANG app, which can be connected just simply with a network cable on an iPad, an iPhone, a Mac, a PC or an Android device. A very similar way to use it would be to use the same audio workflow that I mentioned before, but instead of connecting one control device directly with an Ethernet cable, we can connect a Wi-Fi router. And with that Wi-Fi router, we can have multiple devices at the same time controlling different mixes. That would be an application for a personal monitoring situation where each musician is controlling their own mix. And yeah, that could also be used in a hybrid situation where there's a monitor engineer controlling everything from either his own device or from a mixing board. And at the same time, some musicians might have an iPad or something similar to that to control their own mixes. So that opens up a really interesting way of cooperation between sound engineer and musician. And then, of course, we have the possibility to use a DiGiCo SD or quantum range console with the integrated workflow. Here we would be sending direct outs from each channel that we want to use in 3D from the console into our processor, and we would return those mixes into the console so they can be distributed from there to whichever output device we choose to use. Also, this makes it much easier for us to queue into all the mixes. Of course, there's always KLANG app in the loop, which is connected to our processor and at the same time connected to the console, so everything can be in sync together. Once we have set up everything, we can take advantage of a whole bunch of functionalities. Let's take a look at these in detail. The most obvious one is probably that we can use the console surface. Right now I'm showing here the beautiful new Quantum 338, but it works also with a Quantum 7, the soon to come Quantum 5 console, and any SD range console. So we can use the faders for our levels, just in the same way that we would use it in a DiGiCo only situation, where we just, by using sense on faders, control all the levels for our in-ear monitoring mixes directly from them. And then of course we can use the rotaries and the touchscreens. On the touchscreen, we have the possibility to manipulate all the KLANG parameters. We have the horizontal pan, the azimuth, which would be moving signals around my head. We have the elevation or the vertical pan, which can move signals above my head and below my head. There's a stereo width parameter, which gives us the possibility to distinguish how wide a stereo source is spread in our field of hearing. We have the possibility to solo a Klang channel in a specific mix. Be careful with that one because it's a solo in place, so don't use it surprisingly during the show, please. There's a level, which again, as mentioned before, can also be used with the faders on the console directly or with the rotary. And then we have an on button, which essentially is a mute button. So if I deactivate this on button, it will be muted within Klang. So that channel will be not sending any audio. Of course, we can also use the head representation over there with our finger to just move signals around. And above that, you can see the Klang activation button, which helps us to activate a Klang note. We will get back to that in a few minutes, where I can show you that in detail. On top of that, we can take advantage of the pretty mighty snapshot management system that we find in the SD and quantum range consoles. We don't have to synchronize snapshots of two different devices in this case, because it's a full integration. That means all the Klang parameters are stored and recalled directly from the DiGiCo snapshot management system. You can take advantage of auto updates, but also relative groups and recall saves, of course. The Klang parameters are a part of the aux sense of the console. So if you want to recall save that, you would just recall save the aux, pretty much in the same way that you probably are using it already. And then one of my favorite features, my personal favorites at least, on the DiGiCo consoles are the macros. They are very, very powerful. In case you are not familiar with them, I would advise to take a look at DiGiCo's webinars. They are doing a lot of those where they explain how we can use macros in depth. I believe there's even a special this week on the DiGiCo webinars where they are talking about the most interesting or most useful macros. Later, when we do the live setup, we will also go through applying two different macros as an example. So let's talk about the structure behind that all. A DiGiCo console is basically internally consisting of two major parts. The DiGiCo control computer, which takes care of the surface, so making all the faders and rotaries as well as the touchscreens work and do something. Also, storing and recalling and managing your whole session is happening controlled by this control computer inside there. And then, of course, we have the audio engine of the console, which does the actual processing. So that's where all the channel strip settings are happening, so all the EQs and dynamics are happening, but also levels and summing the individual channels together. A Klang processor is basically the same thing as a DiGiCo audio engine. So that's where all the audio magic is happening, where everything is processed. And Klang app would be the equivalent of the DiGiCo control computer. Our app is of course connected with our processor. And we connect the audio engines, both of them, via a simple audio routing. That could be with MADI, with Dante, or whichever format you want to use and your devices are supported. And of course, we connect Klang app with the control computer side of the DiGiCo. And once we do all that, everything is synchronized and we can just manipulate parameters on both ends of that, and it will be a bidirectional communication. I just got a comment from Chip. Hey Chip, how you doing? Chip is a part of our US team, and he just said the DiGiCo webinar about macros will be this Thursday. Perfect. Thank you very much, Chip. So, in case you're not familiar with those, you should definitely tune in to that webinar from DiGiCo. All right. So, to make the audio going into all the right places, we first need to send the direct outs from our channel strips into our Klang device. Again, we will do that in detail later with my live setup over here. Once we do that, we do the other side. We return the mixes from the KLANG device into our console. And the path that we would recommend here is using the merge inputs of the aux sense. So aux sense on a DiGiCo console always have a merge input. This merge input is a possibility to patch in an external stereo feed directly into the aux master. Two major advantages. First, we can cue exactly in the same way that we would cue in a DiGiCo only situation. Second advantage, we can use both the internal mix bus of the console and the external mix bus of KLANG at the same time without even having to switch around a whole bunch of parameters. Let's check that out in detail. For example, let's say I'm sending my DiGiCo input channel 1 via the direct out into my KLANG device. In this case, that would be my kick-in channel. The kick-in channel would be summed within KLANG together with all the other KLANG parameters, KLANG signals and KLANG paths into the master fader. And the master fader would then go via the audio routing into the merge input of, for example, my DiGiCo aux1 master. Now, if for whatever reason I decide my DiGiCo input channel 64 should not go through KLANG, I want to keep it just on the internal mix bus. I don't need it in 3D, I can have it in stereo. That could be, for example, a talkback channel or all kinds of utility channels that I don't need to send through KLANG. That would just go on the internal bus in the same way as you're used to, directly into the aux1 master. And both those channels, channel 1 and 64, both would meet at the aux master. So, side by side, and you just decide which path it should go. Again, you will see a little bit more detail on that in the live setup that we will do. To recap, we have set up our direct outs, so we're sending the direct outs into our KLANG device. And we're sending the KLANG mixes into the merge inputs of our aux sense. Now what we have to take care is the control side of it. And we're using a specialized OSC protocol for that. And for that, we need a couple of cables. On the DiGiCo SD consoles, there's one network port that we can use for that. If we're using a quantum console, we will find multiple network ports which are switched internally, so you can just pick any of those. In the KLANG devices, we have also always at least one network port. In Fabrik, it's called control port. In KLANG 4, it's called net port. And in DMI KLANG, it's called console port. In DMI KLANG, you can actually see 3 network ports. And all those network ports are doing the same thing. So there's a switch behind them. So actually, you can pick any of these. If we want to incorporate some other devices or we want to have a Wi-Fi router in there, we can just put one of these in the middle and we're done. So that's very easy to connect. That's the physical side. Now we need to make sure that the devices can actually talk to each other. If I open the external control panel on my console, I can see on the lower part of that window the IP address of my console. In my example here, that's 192.168.1.200. My computer can be just configured in the normal network adapter settings. My example here is from a Mac. On Windows it looks a little bit different, but does pretty much the same thing. And of course we can also assign a fixed IP to our KLANG processor if we need to. A quick word to that. Usually I would recommend to just work with the DHCP server, because that would take care of handing out the IP addresses, and if we're working with a KLANG only network, we have no need to use a fixed IP, because once the devices are in the same network, they will be discovered by KLANG app and everything can see everything, more or less automatically. So that's the easiest way, and it's very, very hard to actually have a network problem with that, while IP addresses and fixed IP addresses sometimes are challenging for some of us, being audio engineers and not network engineers. However, if we have the need to work with fixed IPs, of course we can do that. If you have a setup like this, so you have a DiGiCo console which is only responding to fixed IPs, so it's not responding to a DHCP server, And then I have the KLANG world, which could work with the DHCP server. I can even use both at the same time. The only thing that I would recommend is just to separate the ranges of the IPs. So what I personally usually do is I reserve number 2 until 199 for my DHCP range. So this is where all connected iPads, Android devices or whatever would be populating itself with the IP addresses. And then everything 200 and above would be reserved for my fixed IPs. So that's where I would use the console IP, for example, and whatever else I need to have with a fixed IP. And in that way, I can make sure that they're not in the way of each other. Because what you have to keep in mind is that a DHCP server does not know if you have assigned a fixed IP somewhere. So theoretically, this DHCP server could assign the same IP to another device. So you would have 2 devices with the same IP, which of course doesn't work and creates all kinds of problems. So if you want to do a mixed setup between DHCP and fixed IPs, make sure to limit the DHCP range and keep the fixed IPs out of that range. Now, so our DiGiCo and KLANG product went on a date and it went well. So now we need to exchange the phone numbers. We can see the app IP in our external control tab in KLANG app. In this example, that is 1/230. And after adding a KLANG device to my external control panel in my console, I just add this IP to that. And then I memorize the IP address of my console, which I see in the same window, and apply that to the console IP in my KLANG external control tab. So that's very simple. And once we do that, the devices will be able to talk to each other, which is important. And then after that, we take care of connecting all the channels and the auxes. Let's start with the auxes. For that, we're going to press the config button and go to the connect screen in our KLANG app. And there we can see the remote aux. In that drop-down menu, we can see all the auxes that are assigned in my DiGiCo console or in my session at that moment. So I just connect the KLANG mix to a DiGiCo aux and repeat that process for whichever number of auxes I want to use. Then I do the same thing with the input channels. So I go to config and channels, and there I will see the remote column. And if I open the drop-down menu on my first channel, I can see all the input channels that are assigned in my console. So I just assign KLANG channels to DiGiCo channels, and that's it. Of course, we need to take care of stereo linking. I will show you that in detail when we do the live setup. The only thing left to do right now is using the KLANG activation button to actually activate a KLANG node, right? So that decides if this input channel to this selected aux is going through the internal mix bus of the console or if it's going through KLANG. So it's either on or off. So you always have audio, but you just choose with a single push of a button which path it will take. That makes it very easy to apply it slowly or all at once, but also to A/B between stereo and 3D. So you can decide which channel you want to have in 3D and which one not. All right. So this was like the quick path through setting it up, and let's do it now together with my live setup. If there should be any questions, feel free to just type them in the comments, and then later after the official part there will be time enough for all of your questions. All right, so let's go to my KLANG app. First thing I want to do is load either a default session, which would be a completely empty one, or if you have some preferences that you always are using, you can use a console startup file that you can, create yourself. I did that. It's for the most part the same as a default file. I just rearranged some channels in there to my personal preferences. All right, so let's start and take care of the audio routing. Okay, for that, let me just switch over to my console. here we go. All right. So let me just show you my session. It's a virgin session basically, so it has not seen KLANG before. It's a quite simple session in this example. So we have some drum channels, a percussion channel, a bass channel, keys and guitar channel. Then on the second layer I have 3 vocal channels, ambience microphones and 2 reverb returns, as well as a talkback microphone, which I'm not using right now. And then I created 10 auxes, 10 stereo auxes for my 10 musicians, which I want to make happy with the KLANG mix right now. Okay? All right, so let's take care of the audio routing. We go to my first channel and we want to tap the lower part of the channel strip, and that opens our patching for the direct outs. So I can just go there, select whichever audio path I have selected for KLANG, and just patch that directly there. And now I could repeat that for every single channel, but there's also a quicker way to do that. In case you're not familiar with DiGiCo, again, follow DiGiCo and their webinars for a more in-depth experience on that. But for now, let me just show it to you quickly. If you go to Layout and Channel List, that's a really interesting and cool screen because it just shows you everything that is happening inside the console and gives us an overview of what is patched where and all that stuff. So let's open my input channels. You can see my 18 channels that I'm using right now. You can see that my inputs are coming from my multi-tracks and my talkback mic is connected to a local input. And you can also already see the first direct out that I patched in here. If I press this edit button down here, I can also actively change things directly from here. So I can tap here and I see the same patching window that you saw before in the channel strip on my mixing layer before. But what I can do now is, instead of just patching a single one, I can ripple route that. That's a really cool function. So you know that I have 18 channels here. So I tell the console, hey, I want to do the same thing for 18 channels now. And I tap on the first KLANG direct out. And as you can see, it just patched it all right through. That makes it really, really fast to do that. Now let's go to my auxes and make sure that we patch the merge inputs in. For that, I'm going to tap the top of the channel strip. And a little bit down here, I can see the merge input patch. I go again to my KLANG, which is connected via MADI in my case here. I know that my KLANG mixes are coming back on 1, 2 for the first mix, 3, 4 for the second mix, 5, 6 for the third mix, and so on. Again, let's be lazy and use the ripple function. So I'm selecting 10 for my 10 auxes here. And I select the first one. And you can see it just patched it all through, so I don't have to repeat that for every single channel. Now, let's not forget to turn on the merge input. The standard would be that it would be turned off. So we just go to the next channel, turn it on, next on, and so on. Okay, all done. So now our audio is patched. Now we need to make sure that our KLANG and our console are talking to each other. For that, we go to the master screen, setup, and external control. We want to turn on the external control, suppress OSC retransmit, and we want to enable the KLANG interface. And now we add a KLANG device. Now let's take a look at my KLANG IP address. You can see I have 2 IP addresses in here. That's because I have 2 network adapters on my computer, but I know that this one is the adapter that I'm using with my DiGiCo world. So 1,230 is what we want to use right now. So let's type that in, 1,230. The send and receive ports are set automatically, so you don't need to change anything there. That is happening automatically, and I would advise you to not change anything unless you have a very good reason and you really know what you're doing. But for 99.9% of the cases, you don't need to change anything in there. So now we enable that. Okay. So before we move over to KLANG to do the same thing over there, let's memorize our DiGiCo IP address, which is 1,200 at the end. Okay, So let's move over again to my KLANG interface. So I go to config and external control and to the mixing console link. Right now the mode is in off. Let's put it in setup mode. Console type is only one option at this time, which is DiGiCo SD, which also works for the quantum range, of course. The init master decides who would be the boss in case of a first connect, like we're attempting to do it now, or in case of a reconnect. So let's say you pull the network cable between the two devices and there are some parameters changed, and then you reconnect them. Who will transmit the changes to the other device? Again, in most cases, your centerpiece would be probably the console. So setting the init master to console makes sense. So, Pooch is calling me a badass. Man, that is really nice. I hope you're doing well, my friend. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us. Are you planning to become a monitor engineer now? I would love to see that, man. All right, so console IP. We want to assign the DiGiCo IP now here, which is 1200. So let me type that in and watch what happens once I press enter. Now KLANG recognizes the type of console. In my case, that's an SD11. It recognizes the session that is loaded in here. Hold on, KLANG. Okay. Sorry, I have to interrupt again. No way Pooch is becoming a monitor engineer. Too bad. Well, it was worth a try, man. All right, so we see all those in here, and we can see all the AUXes that I have assigned in my DiGiCo session, and I am notified that they're not connected to any KLANG mixes right now because it's an empty session. So let's take care of that. We go to config and connect. And we go to our first mix, which I've selected already. And then we go to the remote aux drop-down menu. So let's select the first mix and connect that to my first DiGiCo aux. And I go to the next one, and I just repeat that process in the way that I'm planning to set it up. Right now, it's pretty much a linear patch. In some other situations, there might be some wedges between that or something. So you will know how you want to connect them. Up here you can see now the name of the aux. Basically that is already imported from the console. So now this is called now the Vox, the drum, the bass, guitar mix, and so on. I was a little bit too lazy to fill in the name there. Apologies for that. And you can see mix 10, which is the KLANG mix, and R10, which is the remote aux. So those are matching already, so 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all cool. We got that. So now we need to take care of the input channels and connect them in the same way. For that, we want to go to the config and channels tab. Here you can see all my input channels. I'm using a DMI KLANG right now, so it's 64 channels and all empty, nothing configured right now. So I'm selecting my first channel, and I open the drop-down menu, and I select my first DiGiCo channel. So all my DiGiCo inputs are visible in this drop-down menu. So I select that one, and now, because I'm lazy, I'm using the ripple function, and now it's patched all the way through, all the way down. Now you might notice that there's a little red link warning here. That's pretty simple, because, for example, my overheads are a stereo channel in the console, and it's just letting me know that the KLANG channel that is connected right now is a mono channel. So I want to link those channels. There were 3 in a row. And then make sure that you don't miss any channels in here, because now we're skipping number 7 and number 9. So the easiest way to just assign it is just tap somewhere above the ones that we just linked and ripple them down again. And then there's another one. Ripple down, and there are 3 more stereo channels. 1, 2, 3, and we ripple them down as well. So now we don't have any red warning icons in here, and everything is set up correctly. All right. Cool. So theoretically, we could start working now. So the next part I'm doing is optional. I just want to make it look really pretty and clean and, you know, have a nice overview. In case I'm in a hurry, I can still skip the next step and just go directly there and do the nice cleaning up part and the beautiful color and icon stuff later. But now let's do it together, okay? So you can see that the names have already been imported from the console, so I don't have to type in any names. But I can open this here and assign a couple of icons. So my kick, my snare, hi-hat, toms, overheads, bass, oops, that was too fast, percussion, forgot percussion. The bass, keys, guitar, female vocal, male vocal, lead vocal, ambience, effects, talkback, that can stay the same way. Okay, and now I have my little icons here, so that already makes it a little bit more pretty. Now I can even go a step further in my managing my OCD and use a couple of KLANG DCA groups. Okay, so let's just assign a couple of those. Let's call this one a drum DCA. I can use the quick labels below here and assign a color to that. And then let's take a bass one and a keys one, guitar, microphones. What else do we have? Effects we have. Let's make them light blue. And I have my my talkback group, and the rest, let's call it a spare group for all the channels that I'm not using right now. Okay, so now they are done here. So now I can just, via drag and drop, just send my input channels into my groups. Let me do that real quick here. So all my drums, my snares. I could have done another group for my percussions, but I think I'm just going to drop them now in my drums group. I think that's fine for now. As you probably know or have heard, the number of KLANG DCAs can be adjusted between 1 and 16. So right now I'm using 8. I could use actually the double amount of that if I would choose to do so. So my vocals are going in here. And then just my ambience, let's put that with the effects group. And then I just have to take care of my talkback, and I'm done with that. Okay, so now I have that. And now there's a quick way to do that, by the way. A different way than using drag and drop would be to just assign to a group directly from the naming here. And now to just make it even more pretty, I can just go into my groups and assign the color to all the members. So let's go through my 8 groups. And ta-da, we have a really pretty nice interface here. Now, keep in mind that all those settings that we're seeing here are completely separate for each mix. So you can see that the different mix is still completely unchanged. So what I want to do at this point is copy from this user and then paste this to all users, which will basically copy every single setting in that mix onto all the mixes in my system. It will warn me that this will override settings, of course, but I want that in this case. And it takes a quick second and I'm getting a success message. And now if I pick any other mix, we can see that this has been applied. Okay, so this was the part that I mentioned was optional. Okay, so we have taken care of that now. So we can actually move over to our external control panel again and change our setting from setup to active. Okay, I can see that there's a question coming in from Fadi. One second, I need to change the color here. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why it has been changed, so nobody can read it. So I think that's better. So if you change the name of the mix on the console after reconnecting, does it change it in KLANG app as well? Yes, absolutely. And even the other way around. So if I change it in KLANG, it would also change it on the console. It's a bidirectional communication. All right, so we go from setup to active. And now it's pulling mix settings from the console, so it's asking the console, hey, what can you tell me? And if I look at the faders, suddenly all my channels are disappearing. So what is happening there? This is actually not a bug or something. This makes sense because KLANG will only show you the relevant channels that are in use at this moment in time, right? So since my DiGiCo session is completely unchanged yet, so there's nothing KLANG-wise in any of the channels yet. So no KLANG channels have been activated. So they are all disabled. So I don't see them in my faders in here, but if I would go to the channels menu, they're still all here. They are just disabled, right? Okay, now let's move back to my console. And now we can use our KLANG activation button. Okay, so I go to my input channels and I tap on one of the aux sends, and that will open my aux panel where I can send this input channel to all of my auxes. If I tap on one of them, it will just select them. Nothing else is happening. But once I press the KLANG activation button, tapping them will actually enable that KLANG node. Let me show it to you together with the KLANG interface. So I'm activating now the kick in channel into my vocal mix. And as you can see, the channel immediately shows up in KLANG app. So now, since that channel is used as a KLANG channel, it is of course shown in KLANG. So I can see the overview. I could repeat that now for every single channel, one after the other. Or I can use another cool function on the console, which is the Option All button. You can find that on any of the SD or Quantum Range console surfaces. And if I press that button and I do anything to my channel strip, it will apply the same change to the full layer that I have in here. So I press the Option All button and activate KLANG here. And now you can see that my first layer altogether showed up in KLANG. Let's repeat that for my other mixes. And I go to my second layer and I repeat the same thing. Option All, I press. So now you can see all my channels are in KLANG. And I repeat that for all my auxes. Okay, so now we have everything set up in there. Okay, all right, so now let's go back here. Okay, so quick note. Now we are basically ready to mix. If I move a fader on my console, 1 second. So if I move a fader on my console, that will just change the level of my KLANG aux. I can change all my positions, which I will show you in a sec. Now let's talk about two different approaches to implementing KLANG into a session. If I have the possibility to have a rehearsal and I can prepare everything at once, you know, I have some time before my artists are coming in, I can set up a whole fresh session and just put everything in KLANG right away and just offer that to my artists. But in many cases, you know, reality just is that we don't always have rehearsals, or at least we don't have as much time in rehearsals as we would wish to have. So there's a good way to actually apply KLANG step by step, even in a running tour without any problems. The approach for that would be that we make the devices talk to each other, so we assign everything, but we don't activate any KLANG channels yet. So the very last step that I did now, we don't do that yet. So all of my mixes stay in the stereo internal mix of the console, maybe the session file that I'm using from the last tour, right? So I have something ready to go, and we can start with that. And then we can just step by step, channel by channel, apply KLANG to the channels that need it the most, or that are the most challenging for us. A classic here would be ambience channels. so, or ambience mics. So that's something that most monitor engineers would use as the very first signal in Klang, because simply we're getting those really big signals which contain a lot of information and a lot of sometimes delays, especially if we're working in arenas and or stadiums. So they can be very complex to handle. So let's just move them out of our way, out of the head. The other signals are still inside my head on that little line between left and right ear, but my ambience mics are out of the way, so I immediately have an increase in transparency without having to change my mix too drastically at once, right? So, and then maybe a couple of songs later or the next day, I just include, let's say, the guitars and the keys. And the day after, the playback channels, you know, and so on. So with tiny steps, we get our mix into Klang without ever having a drastic change at once. So that's a really nice way to do it. Okay, all right. So let's stay in the example of working with a rehearsal. So what most monitor engineers that I know would do is try to bring our mixes for all the musicians into a good starting point, without even having to, you know, do a mix, which we would anyways do in the sound check. So let me move over to the console again. So what we can do, for example, is just move a little bit from everything into our mixes. Let's start with one mix. So I'm selecting my first mix. I can move now my faders in there, or I can use the Option Alt function again and move a fader, which will move the faders for my whole layer in here. And let's just put in like a little bit, like maybe up to minus 20 dB for all of my channels. So everything is in there, but not too much, right? So from there, we can just then decide, and the artist can decide which signals they want to hear more or less, all right? And then we can assign a couple of positions of the signals around and above our head and below our head, of course. In case you have not worked with Klang yet, I would recommend to visit us in one of our binaural basics webinars, where we are talking about the science behind Klang, how binaural hearing works, and we're also talking about good starting points, you know, which positions for which signals can make sense as a very good starting point without even having the possibility to listen into them yet. So let me just do that really quickly without going into all the details. So I know where I want to have my kick in, I know where I want to have my kick out. So let me just move some signals around here a little bit. My hi-hat, let's move that over there and a little bit elevated. My toms to the back, a little bit lower. My overheads also to the back and higher. My percussion player is on the right side of the drum set. Bass, like a bass amp behind us. The keys are on the right side of the stage as well, and the guitar on the left side of the stage. Okay, now we go to my next layer. And I have my backing vocals. Let's move them there. And these I put here. Lead vocals stay nicely put in the center position with some elevation. Let me show you the elevation actually. So if I move this here, I can move the signals above me and below me. Ambience mics, they are staying in front of us, but a little bit higher, like we would see the audience from standing on top of the stage. The drum reverb, I put them behind me and I put them lower, and the vocal reverb, I put them behind me, but higher. So they're in the same position, but they're separated between the elevation. All right. So now we have a nice starting point that should work out pretty well for most of the musicians in my band. Now, I set that up only for one mix. So what I can do now is go to my auxes, tap the top of the auxes, and here I have my mix presets. So let's just assign a new mix preset and call that KLANG init. All right, so this mix preset is storing all the levels, all the panning positions, pretty much everything for the mix. And I want to copy that over to my other mixes. So I select my next one, recall that preset. You can see that there's some level coming in right away. And I go through all my 10 auxes with that. So now I have a really nice starting point, including positions, including levels and whatnot. So the only thing I have to do now before my artists are coming in is maybe just customize that a little bit towards the needs of the different instruments. So the positions that are placed now are working for the lead singer, or they are applied as that. For the guitarist, I would probably go into his mix and pull his guitar in the front position and slightly elevated position, because that's a focus area where we always perceive the signals as very important. And then I go to the vocals, because they are now in the same position as the guitar for the guitarist. So I move them out of the way so the guitarist can hear the vocals nicely, but they're not in the way of his guitar. And so on. We can do that throughout all the mixes in whichever way we want to, or we feel the need to do that. All right. So, and that's it. We can work, we can mix. We have pretty much everything we need. I promised you in the beginning that we would talk a little bit about macros. So let's talk about 2 macro examples. One of them would be a KLANG bypass macro, which gives me the possibility to disable all KLANG channels at once and let the audio path fall back into the internal stereo mix. This is really handy if I just want to A/B between KLANG and 3D. So let's just set it up. I go to my master screen, setup, macros. You can see I have a couple of macros in this session here already, but they are very simple ones. So just selecting my first 4 auxes and save a current session. So let's do a new macro now. Let's call it KLANG, KLANG off. Okay, so I go to the external control panel section and I look for bypass KLANG. This is basically this button here, bypass KLANG. Okay, and the value, since we want to turn off KLANG, needs to turn on the bypass button. So we want to select the value on. A new line. And now this is important. We go to the aux outputs and select merge on. And we make sure that we turn the merge on button off. And not only for one aux, but for all my 10 auxes. This is important because if I would press the bypass button, I would hear both the audio from the internal mix bus as well as from the KLANG mix bus at the same time. So I need to make sure that the console understands if I bypass KLANG, it needs to turn off the merge inputs of my KLANG auxes. So let's put that now on the off action of my macro button number 7. And now we duplicate that and just turn the whole thing around. So we call that one KLANG on. And now we just invert the values in here. So bypass KLANG, we put it to an off value. And the merge inputs, we put to an on value. And that is set on my macro button number 7 for the on action. So let's see if that worked, if I programmed that right. So you can see here in my main layer that KLANG is activated on all of those channels. You can see that with those little KLANG icons here. And if I press my macro button, they're all grayed out. I hope you can see that. So basically they're just grayed out. And the interesting thing is, let me just turn it back on again. If I go to my auxes, take a look at the levels in here. If I use that button again, we never lose audio. Okay, so now we are 3D, now we're stereo on the internal mix bus. That's the only thing that changes. We lose 3D, but we don't lose audio. That is very important. Also, if I show you again, wait, let me show it to you like that. So if I bypass KLANG, I get also notified about that on my KLANG app over there. So now it's telling me SD is set to KLANG bypass. All right. Cool. So that is one very handy macro. Let me show you one other one that is quite handy and very often used, especially for the setup, which would be a macro that turns on all KLANG auxes for one specific channel that I just selected. Okay, so I go to new macro, let's call it one channel on. I could program that again here, or I can take the lazy option and press the capture button. And now the macro will record everything that I'm doing on the console. So let's go here, I select my first channel, KLANG activation button, and now I turn off KLANG in this case because it was activated. Doesn't even matter in which way I do that. I turn off the capture function, and now you can see it just recorded everything that I did, even including the screen switch, which I don't need, so I can just remove that now. Now, the KLANG auxes have several values. So we have off, and then we have on, which equals mono, but going through KLANG, stereo through KLANG, and 3 would be 3D. So let's just put all of them in 3D mode. Bear with me for a sec. And then I don't want to do that for one specific channel. I want to do it for any channel that I'm just using. Okay, for that I can take advantage of the star command. So I'm just selecting my first channel and decrease the value until I see that little star. And what that does is simply it applies this macro to whichever channel I have selected at this point in time. Okay, so I have done that. And now let's put that on the on action of my macro button number 6. And now we duplicate that one and turn it around in the same way as we did that before. One channel off. Okay, so we have everything in here already, so we need to now just to change the values in here back to off, which would mean no KLANG, just the internal stereo value. Okay, done. Let's see if that worked. I'm going to my input channels. So you can see my first channel is there's no KLANG in there, so I press my macro button number 6, and there we are. I can also go to the hi-hat if I decide that the hi-hat should not be in 3D, it should be in stereo for all the mixes, and here we go. And we can turn it around again. So, very easy way to work with that. Okay, cool. So, those are not the only interesting macros that we can use. I just wanted to give you 2 examples and a little workflow how we can work with the macros with KLANG. I'm sure that some of you already have come up with much cooler macros, or you will come up with them. If you do, let us know. We're always curious what kinds of crazy stuff we can do with that. So now it's time for questions. I think there were already a couple of questions coming in here. So let me see if I did not answer anything. Hey, I can see that my buddy Michael is here. How are you doing? Very good to see you. Joao is asking, so there are no latency between console and KLANG. Well, in every digital environment there's a latency. So even having a MADI connection somewhere is introducing a little bit of latency, but usually that's in the range of a couple of samples, so that's not noticeable. DMI KLANG, what I'm using right now, is featuring a processing latency of 0.25 milliseconds, so a quarter millisecond. So that should not be any issue. Ishan, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How long does it take usually to set up? Well, now I took, like the long road, and I was explaining quite a bit. Usually when I do a setup for a small session like this, 5 minutes tops, I would say. Because I did it a couple of times, so I know what I'm doing. If you do it for the first time, you might have to take a look at our instructions, which my colleague could maybe post in here in the comments. KLANG.com/DiGiCo. That's where you find a step-by-step introduction on how we can connect everything. So maybe for the first time it will take you 15 minutes or something, or 20 minutes even. But once you do it a couple of times and you know the steps, 5 minutes. If it's a bigger session, so if we're talking about like 100 input production or 150 or 256, if we max out a Quantum 7, it might take a couple of minutes longer, but yeah, it's not a huge setup, and you do that once. All the KLANG mix parameters are stored in the console. The only thing that we should store in KLANG, let me just show you that real quick, is save a preset after we did all those things. Because what is stored only in the KLANG preset is the remote channel mapping, as well as the colors and the icons and all that stuff. So it's much easier and cleaner if you just store it there as well. And then you are very quick with the setup. If you go to the next city, for example, and you have a different gear in there, it's all reproducible. And also, of course, because this question comes every now and then, what happens if I switch from, let's say, an SD10 to an SD5? Is that a problem? No. You just convert the file like you would always do between the consoles, and all the KLANG parameters, they're just stored side by side with everything else on the console file. So you can just switch to a different console without any problems. Okay. Rodrigo is asking, why and when is productively used bypass KLANG? Well, if you want to A/B, for example, you know, so let's say you did the slow approach of implementing KLANG. Okay, so you did one channel after the other, so it basically went over a couple of show days that you implemented all of them. And your artist is asking about it. Hey, so what's the difference? Because the process going there is not too drastic. So you can just use the KLANG bypass button, and they're falling back to the same stereo that they used to work with before. So that is one application. Another would be, let's say somebody drives a forklift over your network cable and you just happen to have it laying between there. So the data connection is cut, right? Or your MADI cable breaks between the devices, or whatever happens, you know. You can just simply, with one push of a button, fall back onto the console and, you know, check all the stuff. Is my cable still okay? Yes, it's okay. And then you can activate it again. Or let's say you're touring and there's one show somewhere on the North Pole where you cannot get a KLANG device for that show. So instead of just having to reprogram your whole show, you just press the KLANG bypass button and it falls back into the internal levels of the console, but keeping the same levels that you were using in KLANG before. So you're losing 3D, you're losing quite a big chunk of your audio quality in there, but you have a fallback option that is working even throughout all your snapshots. So those would be a couple of the applications for that. Joao is asking, DMI with SD11. Well spotted. I'm using an orange box for that. So of course I can use an orange box with DMI KLANG with any kind of console. It can be an SD console, an S-series console. It can also be something completely different. So DMI in a orange box with an input card is always a good choice for that. Marcy, hey buddy, how you doing? Does using nodal processing make the workflow any different? I wouldn't see how, because the nodal processing of the quantum consoles is completely separate from the KLANG processing, because the KLANG audio is taken from the direct outs and returned to the aux masters directly, while the nodal processing is picking out the audio in a different way, sending it to a different channel strip and then to the auxes. So it doesn't affect the KLANG workflow in any way. You just have to choose, because the nodal processing only works internally on the console, which makes sense because it wouldn't work audio-wise any otherwise. Okay. So let me see. Fabricio is asking, will KLANG have more than 16 mixes and more than 64 inputs? You're so greedy. Well, we're not lazy people. That's all I can say. All right. Deepak, I hope again I spelled it or pronounced it correctly. If not, please don't hate me. Can we use KLANG for front of house mix? Of course you can. The question is what you want to do with it. Because a binaural processing like we're using in KLANG is only working correctly under headphones, because we need 100% separation between left and right channel for that to work. So if you have a PA in front of you, your left ear will still pick up the right PA and the other way around. So you would definitely not get a 3D effect out of it or an immersive sound out of a stereo PA. That said, if you're in a recording studio, in a mixing room, and it's a really dry room and you're sitting right in the sweet spot of the studio monitors, you get a little bit of that, but that's not really a usable thing. That said, I know a couple of front of house engineers who have used it on a couple of tours just to get some separation between the signals. Typically, those would be, like really big complex setups with, a band and an orchestra and a lot of playbacks and all that stuff, So what I know, a couple of people would move some signals above and below, which again, you won't get that as a orientation or as a real immersive PA setup, but you get some more separation out of it. But, I would not recommend it because that is not the precise way of how KLANG works. But hey, try it. If it works for you, it's good. Your ears are the boss, nobody else. If you want to work with an immersive PA, please take a look at our friends at L Acoustics with the Elisa system, where, by the way, there's a KLANG integration. Take a look at that. But also our fellow Germans of DNB, Meyer, Astro. So there's a couple of immersive PA processors, and they're really amazing in all the different ways that they are working and using. Okay, Severin. In the last example with the macro, is it necessary to bypass the KLANG master button of the channel, or that's okay with only the on-off button for each aux? Not sure if I understand your question completely. Oh, yeah, sorry. That took me a little moment. Okay, so if you would not use the bypass button, but just deactivate the merge input, you would not have any audio. Because the console would still think it's in 3D, and it would still think it's going through KLANG, so it would not send anything on the internal mix bus. That's why you need to have both function, and that's why we're combining them with macros. I hope that makes sense, Severin. Let's see. Paul is asking, hello KLANG, wie geht es dir? Paul, you're impressing me more and more. You're probably the only Scotsman who can speak German that well. Mir geht's gut, vielen Dank. Hope you're doing well as well, my friend. I hope they let us out of the cages very soon so we can have a beer in the US again together. All right. Whoops, what did I do now? Oh, I didn't know I can do that. That looks pretty cool. All right. I think those were all the questions. I hope I didn't miss any questions. In case I did, please feel free to just send us an email or a message on Facebook. Also, if you have any wishes for future webinars, send us a message, comment, let us know. We are definitely going to use the time that we are locked in and locked down and we cannot travel and tour right now, to stay in touch with you guys and exchange a lot of information and cool ideas. If you have any new and different ways to do things or apply things, let us know. We're very, very curious about that. We will also come up with a few new webinars. So some topics we are repeating every now and then because we want to keep them live. We don't want to just put them on YouTube right now. Later we will do that, but for now we want to keep it live and interactive. Some new topics are coming. The first new one for this week will be on Thursday, where we will talk about MIDI and OSC. So that's a little bit deeper, and I am actually joined there by my friend and colleague Pascal, who is one of the founders of KLANG, and actually the guy who had the idea of KLANG many years ago. So that should be very interesting, so join us for that one. Make sure to visit our friends at DiGiCo, say hi from the KLANG guys when they do webinars. And if you have any Spanish-speaking friends, on Wednesday evening European time, which should be like late morning American times, roughly, we're doing a Spanish-speaking console integration webinar. So I'm going to be joined by Fernando Delgado from DiGiCo, who speaks Spanish, while I don't. So yeah, I will be be joined by him. He will do most of the explanations because he's an expert as much as I am on this. And I just might throw in a few stupid comments every now and then. Alrighty. And yeah, and of course, keep an eye out for all the other webinars that we're doing. And last but not least, stay safe, stay healthy, and let's hope that we can all see each other very soon on trade shows, on hands-on seminars, or on tour. Okay? All right. Have a beautiful day. Let us know if there should be any questions, and hope to see you all very soon. Bye-bye.